Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. Normally, we take a big topic, we pull from a whole stack of sources, and we try to, build a kind of mosaic.
A broad overview.
Exactly. But today, we're zooming in. We're putting a single towering object under the microscope. We're looking at a book that you could argue pretty much invented the modern true crime genre as we know it.
Absolutely. It's the heavyweight champion of the category.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the history of nonfiction crime writing, there's a clear line. There's everything that came before this book, and then there's everything that came after.
We are talking, of course, about Helter Skelter, the 1974 account of the Manson family murders and the trial that followed, written by Vincent Bugliosi and Curt Gentry. And I want to start with just the sheer scale of this thing, because the numbers alone tell you this isn't just a book, it's a cultural phenomenon.
It really is.
Our source material notes that by 2015, and that's almost a decade ago now, Helter Skelter had sold over 7 million copies.
7 million.
That makes it, by a long shot, the best-selling true crime book in history.
And that is a truly staggering number, especially when you think about the competition. You know, people always bring up Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
Of course.
And it's a masterpiece, no question, a foundational text. But Helter Skelter, it operates on a totally different level of public engagement. It's not just literary. It's procedural. It's granular. It grabbed the public imagination in a way that maybe even Capote didn't.
Why do you think that is?
Well, part of it is the sheer horror of the crimes themselves. But I think the bigger reason, the one we really need to focus on, is who was telling the story.
Right. And that is the absolute core distinction we have to make right at the top. This isn't an outsider looking in. This isn't some journalist who flew into town 2 years after the fact to interview the neighbors.
No.
The primary author, Vincent Bugliosi, he was the prosecutor.
And that perspective, that single fact, defines every single page of this book. You have to understand, when you read about a crime, you're usually getting a narrative that's been reconstructed from, police reports, old interviews, court transcripts.
So you're getting a historical account.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here, you're getting something else. You are inside the head of the man whose job it was to build the legal cage around Charles Manson. Bugliosi served as the prosecutor in the 1970 trial. So the book is, in effect, his case files, his strategy sessions, his frustrations, all translated into this driving narrative prose.
Which gives the writing a very specific kind of intensity, doesn't it? It's not just, here's what happened. It's, here is how we proved what happened, and here is why it was so damn hard to do.
Yes. It frames the entire narrative as a battle. It's Bugliosi versus the defense attorneys, Bugliosi versus the media, Bugliosi versus the clock, and maybe most interestingly, Bugliosi versus the sheer mind-bending insanity of the motive.
We'll definitely get to that.
Because he wasn't just trying to prove who held the knife. He was trying to prove a philosophy, a worldview, and that's a much, much harder job.
Let's talk about the timeline for a second, because the gap between the events and the book's publication is actually pretty significant. The Tate LaBiancas murders happened in August of 1969.
Right.
The main trial, basically consumed all of 1970. But the publisher, W.W. Norton and Company, they don't actually release the book until 1974.
And that 4-year gap is absolutely crucial to the quality of the final product. I mean, think about it. If this had been some quick and dirty paperback rushed out the week after the verdict...
It would have been forgotten in a year.
Absolutely. It would be a historical footnote.
Yeah.
That time, those 4 years, allow Bugliosi and his co-author, Curt Gentry, to organize a literal mountain of evidence. You have to remember this was, at the time, the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history. The sheer volume of the court transcripts was, well, it was biblical.
So to distill all of that, all those dead ends and sidebar motions, down into a readable narrative with actual pacing and suspense, that took some serious architectural skill.
Immense skill. And you mentioned Curt Gentry. He often gets a bit overlooked in the shadow of Bugliosi's, let's say, dominant personality. But Gentry was a very seasoned writer. He knew how to build a book.
So it was a true partnership?
It seems to be. You often see this in nonfiction. You have the expert, the person with the story, in this case the lawyer, and then you have the writer, the person who knows how to shape it. Gentry likely handled a lot of the structure, the pacing, the tone, but the voice is unmistakably Bugliosi's.
How would you describe that voice?
It's precise, it's confident, maybe a little arrogant, it's incredibly detailed, almost obsessively so, and it's very legalistic, but somehow at the same time still gripping.
Yeah.
He makes you feel like you're on the prosecution team with him.
Another thing that sets the book apart is its scope. I think in the popular consciousness, this story often gets flattened down to just Charles Manson. But the book, it's really an ensemble piece, for lack of a better word.
It has to be. The Manson family wasn't a monolith. It was a complex, twisted social structure with its own hierarchy and rules. The book goes deep into the specific cases against Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and the others. It's this tangled web of defendants.
And Bugliosi's central challenge was linking them all together.
Yes. He had to build a case that could connect the actions of, say, a Patricia Krenwinkel inside the LaBianca house with a knife in her hand directly to the commands of a man, Charles Manson, who wasn't even in the room.
Which brings us to the legal concept of conspiracy. That's really the engine of the book, isn't it?
It is the whole thing.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, it's often much, much harder to convict the person who ordered the murder than the person who actually committed the act, especially when the person giving the orders speaks in riddles and obscure song lyrics.
Well, let's get right into those riddles, because we can't possibly discuss the book without dissecting that title, Helter Skelter. It's a phrase that has become so synonymous with murder and chaos, but in 1968, it was just a song.
A pretty noisy, chaotic song on the Beatles' White Album, but yeah, just a song. And to really understand the book, you have to understand how Bugliosi systematically deconstructs Manson's interpretation of that entire album.
This is the motive section of the trial.
It is, and it's arguably the most famous and certainly the most bizarre motive in the history of American crime.
The source material we have highlights that Manson was, and I'm quoting here, particularly fascinated by the White Album. But fascinated? That feels like a massive understatement for what Bugliosi describes in the book.
Oh, it's the understatement of the century. Manson didn't just like the album. He treated the White Album as a divine prophecy, a coded transmission sent directly to it.
From the Beatles.
He believed the Beatles were the four angels mentioned in the Book of Revelation. He thought they were speaking to him personally across the Atlantic, sending him specific, hidden instructions to prepare for an imminent apocalyptic race war.
And this apocalyptic race war was what he named Helter Skelter.
Correct. In Manson's theology, if you could even call it that, he believed that black Americans would soon rise up in a violent revolt and overthrow the entire white establishment. He thought this war would basically destroy civilization as we know it.
So where did he and the family fit in?
His plan was for him and his followers, the family, to hide out in the desert. He was searching for something he called the bottomless pit, literally a hole in the ground near Death Valley, where they would wait for the war to end.
And then what?
Then, when the dust settled, Manson believed that the victors of this war, who he presumed would be black people, would realize they didn't know how to run the world. And in their confusion, they would turn to him, Charles Manson, to come out of his hole and lead them.
It sounds like pure, unadulterated delusion. And this is the monumental challenge Bugliosi faces in the book and in the courtroom. How do you present this theory to a jury of 12 regular people in Los Angeles in 1970 without them just laughing you out of the room?
That is the absolute brilliance of the prosecution strategy that he lays out in the book. Bugliosi realized he couldn't just stand up and say, Manson is crazy.
Yeah.
Because if the jury thinks he's just crazy, they might find him insane and not guilty.
Right.
He had to show that Manson was consistently crazy, that there was a logic to his madness. He had to prove that the Tate LaBianca murders were a deliberate act designed to start this war.
To be the catalyst.
Precisely. The prosecution's argument was that the family murdered prominent white people like Sharon Tate and then tried to frame black militants for the crimes. That's why they wrote words like pig and death to pigs in the victim's blood. It was meant to look like the work of groups like the Black Panthers and ignite white fear and retaliation.
So the murder wasn't the end goal, it was just the trigger.
It was the match to light the fuse of Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
And the book details what a struggle it was for Bugliosi to even get this motive admitted as evidence. It was incredibly risky. The defense argued it was prejudicial and absurd. If the jury thought the motive was just too unbelievable, they might have acquitted Manson on the conspiracy charges.
But Bugliosi insisted.
He insisted. He argued, successfully, that you couldn't understand the why of these crimes without understanding the Helter Skelter scenario. It was the key that unlocked everything. It linked the lyrics of the Beatles, songs like Piggies, Blackbird, Revolution 9, directly to the details of the crime scenes.
It is still just surreal to think about a major American courtroom trial where the prosecutor is on his feet, dissecting Lennon-McCartney lyrics as if they were a blueprint for mass murder.
It really was this bizarre collision of pop culture, counterculture, and the criminal justice system. You have the biggest, most beloved band in the world being cited as the direct catalyst for the most gruesome, terrifying crimes of the decade.
It's often said that this was the moment the 60s officially died.
I think that's right. The book captures that transition perfectly. It's the moment the whole peace and love vibe of the counterculture curled into something dark and nightmarish.
Okay, let's move on to the investigation part of the book's subtitle. Because reading through the source material and the book itself, it's clear this was not a simple straight line from crime to arrest.
Oh, not even close. And this is where the book also serves as a pretty scathing critique of law enforcement at the time. Bugliosi pulls no punches. He is very clear about the incompetence and the lack of communication in the initial investigation.
Why is that?
Well, you have to remember, the Tate murders happened in the Hollywood Hills, which was LAPD jurisdiction. The LaBianca murders happened the very next night in a different area, Los Feliz, which was under the jurisdiction of the LA County Sheriff's Department.
And in 1969, those two massive agencies weren't exactly sharing a central database.
They weren't even sharing a cup of coffee. The book details these incredible lapses in communication. They didn't connect the two crime scenes for weeks. They had the actual killers in custody on completely unrelated charges. Things like auto theft, arson, the raid on Spawn Ranch, and they let them go. They had no idea these were the people responsible for the crime of the century.
And the book details the sheer brutality of those crimes, which is important for understanding the public terror at the time. The Tate murders at 170 Cielo Drive. We're talking about the actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant.
And her friends. Jay Sebring, a famous celebrity hairstylist, Abigail Folger, the coffee heiress, her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski, and a young man named Stephen Parent, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a complete massacre.
And the book walks you through the crime scene analysis in a way that was very new for a popular audience back then.
Very new. He discusses blood spatter patterns, the positioning of the bodies, the forensic evidence, the sheer frenzy and overkill of the attack. It was meant to shock, but also to educate the reader on the reality of the violence.
And then, the very next night, the LaBianca murders. A wealthy grocer, Lino LaBianca, and his wife, Rosemary.
Which in some ways was even more terrifying to the general public.
Yeah.
Because Sharon Tate was a movie star. You could, rationalize that away as part of some bizarre Hollywood thing.
All right, a drug deal gone wrong or something like that.
Exactly. But the LaBiancas, they were just normal, successful people. The randomness of their murder was intended by Manson to create widespread panic. The similarity in the ritualistic aspects, the writing in blood, the use of forks. It was meant to show that this wasn't an isolated incident. This could happen to anyone.
Our source material also specifically lists Donald Shorty Shea in the section of murders known. This is a part of the story that often gets overshadowed by the Tate LaBianca narrative, but it's crucial in the book.
It is, because it shows a different side of the family's violence. Donald Shea was a stuntman and a ranch hand at Spawn Ranch, where the family was living. They came to suspect him of being a snitch, of talking to the police.
So they killed him.
They killed him and dismembered him. His murder was particularly gruesome, and his body wasn't found for years. Bugliosi includes Shea and another murder victim, Gary Hinman, to frame the family not just as these, celebrity thrill killers, but as a functioning, localized, organized crime unit that brutally eliminated its perceived threats.
The book is, as the source notes, 502 pages in the original hardcover. That is a dense, dense read.
It's dense because the investigation was a puzzle with thousands of pieces. And Bugliosi takes you through all of them. He spends entire chapters detailing the dead ends, the false leads, the theory that it was a drug burn, the theory that it was a party that got out of hand.
So the reader gets to experience the same frustration the detectives did.
Absolutely. Which makes the breakthrough, when it finally comes, that much more dramatic. And the key thing is, the breakthrough doesn't come from brilliant Sherlock Holmes-style detective work.
No.
It comes because one of the killers, Susan Atkins, got arrested on a different charge and couldn't stop bragging to her cellmate.
That's the Virginia Graham connection.
Right. That's the whole case. If Susan Atkins hadn't had the incredible vanity and arrogance to confess to her cellmate, the Tate LaBianca murders might very well be a famous unsolved case to this day. The book really highlights the fragility of justice. It so often hangs on a single fragile thread of human ego.
So the trial happens, the verdicts come in, and the book comes out in '74. It's a massive commercial success, as we've said. But our source also notes it won the 1975 Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime Book.
And that is a huge piece of validation. The Edgar Awards are they're like the Oscars for the mystery and crime writing world. For a prosecutor's memoir to win that award meant that the literary community was accepting it as a well-crafted, serious narrative, not just a sensational cash grab.
It elevated the genre.
Completely. Before Helter Skelter, a lot of true crime was seen as pulp. Lurid detective magazines, cheap paperbacks. This book was reviewed seriously in the New York Times. It was treated as important social history.
It really did pave the way for the true crime obsession we see today, didn't it? I mean, without Helter Skelter, do we get a show like The Jinx? Do we get a podcast like Serial?
I really don't think we do, not in the same way. Bugliosi proved to a mass audience that the details of the legal process, the jury selection, the evidentiary motions, the sidebar conferences with the judge, could be just as dramatic and compelling as the murder itself. He basically taught an entire generation of readers how to be armchair prosecutors.
And the longevity of the text is also worth pointing out. It wasn't just a 70s phenomenon that faded away. Our source mentions a 25th anniversary edition was published in 1994.
Right, and that edition is really important because it included a new, lengthy afterword written by Bugliosi. And this update is fascinating because it allowed him to comment on everything that had happened in the intervening 2 decades.
Like the parole hearings.
Exactly. The parole hearings for the various Manson family members have become this grim, predictable ritual in California.
And Bugliosi remained deeply involved in that fight right up until his death.
He did. The afterword reflects his absolute burning frustration that these individuals who committed these unbelievably heinous acts were technically eligible for parole. He used the updated editions of the book to keep the public case against them active. He wanted to make sure they never, ever got out.
It's also interesting how we can see the evolution of the audiobook format through this one title. The source notes that Bugliosi actually narrated the original Talking Book's unabridged version himself.
Which is pretty rare, and it must have added this incredible layer of gravitas and authority to hear the story told in the prosecutor's own voice.
But then much later in 2011, Audible.com commissioned a brand new unabridged recording by Scott Brick.
And Scott Brick is like the voice of modern audiobooks. He's a superstar narrator. The fact that a company like Audible would invest in a huge, new, high-production re-recording nearly 40 years after the book first came out, it just shows you that the demand never went away. New generations are constantly discovering this story and want to hear it.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to the cultural ripple effects. Because if the book is the sun at the center of this system, there are an awful lot of planets orbiting it. The source lists the direct adaptations, starting with that big 1976 TV movie.
That film was a monster ratings event. It was a huge deal. It starred an actor named Steve Railsback as Manson, and his performance was so terrifyingly accurate, so convincing, that it reportedly hurt his career for a while afterward. People couldn't separate him from the character.
And then they did it again, another TV film in 2004.
Right, retelling the exact same story. Now, what's interesting is that most of these movies, these direct adaptations, they aren't based on independent research. They're explicitly based on the book Helter Skelter. Bugliosi's narrative became the official canonical history of the events.
But the influence goes way beyond those direct adaptations. The source points out something I found fascinating. The 2008 horror film, The Strangers.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a critical connection to make. The Strangers is this incredibly tense film about a random, motiveless home invasion. And the director, Brian Bertino, has said in interviews that Helter Skelter, the book, was a primary influence.
Why?
Because it taps into the specific modern fear that the Manson murders unleashed on the American psyche. The idea that you are not safe in your own home, that locks and gates don't matter. The killers and the Strangers, when asked why they're doing this, give the chilling answer, because you were home. That is pure Manson logic.
It shifted the cultural fear from, the jealous ex-husband or the disgruntled employee to...
The wandering psycho.
Yeah.
Exactly. Before Manson, murder in popular culture was usually seen as intimate, something with a clear motive. After Manson, murder could be random, chaotic, and philosophical. That's a fundamental shift, and Bugliosi's book is the document that chronicles exactly when and how that switch was flipped.
The list of Manson media in our source material it's just exhaustive. I mean, I'm just looking at the films. The Manson Family from 97, Live Freaky, Die Freaky from 2006, Charlie Says from 2018, The Haunting of Sharon Tate.
A truly terrible movie, by the way.
And of course, the big one, Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from 2019.
Which is such an interesting counterpoint to all the others, because it's a revisionist history. It's a fairy tale that gives Sharon Tate the happy ending she was brutally denied in real life. But the thing is, you can't appreciate the power of that revision unless you already know the original horror story.
Right. The whole tension of that movie relies on the audience knowing what's supposed to happen that night.
Yes, we're dreading the inevitable, which makes the twist, when it comes, so cathartic and powerful. The film is in direct conversation with the narrative cemented by Helter Skelter.
And it's not stopping. There's even an upcoming project listed here, CAAOS, The Manson Murders, which is slated for 2025. It feels like we just can't, as a culture, let this go.
It's become the closest thing America has to a foundational dark myth, like a Greek tragedy. It has every element you could ask for: celebrity, beauty, sex, drugs, rock and roll, cults, religion, and horrifying death. And it all sits right at the fulcrum of a massively changing society.
The end of an era.
You could say the 60s officially ended on the night of August 9th, 1969, and we are still replaying that tape over and over, trying to see if it could have ended differently.
Let's talk a bit more about the family themselves. The book spends a lot of time delineating the different personalities. It wasn't just Manson and a bunch of, mindless robots.
No, and that's a common and dangerous misconception. The book is very clear about the agency of the followers, especially the women. Susan Atkins, who they called Sadie, was a hardened true believer. Her testimony before the grand jury, which is in the book, is terrifyingly remorseless.
And Patricia Krenwinkel, Katie?
She was a direct and brutal participant in the violence at both houses. The book paints a portrait of these as individuals who made choices, not just as hypnotized zombies.
And then, in the middle of all that, you have Linda Kasabian.
The key figure. She is the linchpin of the entire prosecution. She went with him on both nights. She was the driver. But she never went inside the houses and didn't participate in the killings.
And she's the one who eventually flipped.
She turned state's evidence. She became Bugliosi's star witness. The book positions her as this fragile moral center in a universe with a complete lack of morality. The entire trial, and therefore the entire book, really hinges on her testimony. Bugliosi had to make a deal with her to convict the others.
Which adds a whole other layer of legal and moral drama, doesn't it? Trusting a member of the cult to destroy the cult.
It's a classic prosecutor's dilemma, and Bugliosi walks you through his decision-making process, his doubts about whether the jury would believe her.
The source also lists names like Lynette Sweeky from. She wasn't actually charged with the Tate LaBianca murders, but she looms large in the story as this lingering, ongoing threat.
She's the proof of Manson's enduring hold. She was the most vocal and visible of the followers who weren't in jail. She camped out on the street corner outside the courthouse every single day of the trial, carving an X into her forehead in solidarity with Manson.
And she later famously tried to assassinate President Gerald Ford.
Right. The book uses figures like her to show that the ideology, the Helter Skelter belief system, didn't just die when Manson was arrested. It was a virus that was still active and dangerous out in the world.
The locations mentioned in the source material, Spahn Ranch, Barker Ranch, they almost become characters in themselves in the book.
Oh, they're incredibly atmospheric. Spahn Ranch, in particular, it was this old, dilapidated movie set where B-list westerns used to be filmed. So you have this surreal image of the family living in the ruins of a fake Old West, playing dress-up as outlaws, while they're literally planning the end of the world. It adds this cinematic, almost unbelievable layer to the reality of it.
And Barker Ranch.
That's way out in Death Valley. It's where they were finally captured. It emphasizes the dropout nature of the group. They were really trying to exit civilization entirely and live on the absolute fringes.
We touched on the Beatles, but we should also acknowledge Manson's own musical ambitions because the book makes a big deal out of it. Our source even lists as a discography for him an album called Lie, The Love and Terror Cult.
Yes, and this is absolutely key to his psychology. Charles Manson was, at his core, a failed musician, a frustrated artist. That is central to the story Bugliosi tells.
He had connections, right? He wasn't just some guy with a guitar.
He was. He hung out with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys for a time. The source notes that the Beach Boys actually recorded a song, Never Learn Not to Love, which was a reworked version of a Charles Manson song originally called Cease to Exist.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. The Beach Boys, the ultimate clean-cut, all-American vision of California, recorded a song written by Charles Manson.
It shows you how close he came to some form of legitimate success. Bugliosi argues pretty persuasively in the book that this rejection by the music industry is what ultimately fueled his murderous rage. He wanted to be bigger than the Beatles. And when he realized he couldn't join them, he decided to burn down the society that produced them.
Let's talk about Bugliosi himself. Helter Skelter made him a household name, but he did not rest on those laurels. Our source lists a pretty significant bibliography of his work that came after this book.
He became a very prolific and, I think it's fair to say, a very combative author. He took that prosecutorial mindset and applied it to history. He treated history like it was a courtroom, and he was always making his case.
We See and The Sea Will Tell from 1991.
Another true crime classic, a very different kind of case, about a double murder on a remote Pacific island. Again, incredibly detailed.
But then he moves into much bigger topics. Reclaiming History from 2007.
That book is his magnum opus on the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
It is a monster. I mean, it's over 1,600 pages long. And in it, he essentially prosecutes Lee Harvey Oswald and defends the Warren Commission report. He attacks the conspiracy theorists with the exact same logical, evidence-based ferocity that he attacked the Manson defense team with.
And then the prosecution of George W. Bush for murder from 2008.
You see the pattern, right? He frames everything as a legal indictment. He was a man who seemed to believe in the power of a well-argued case, backed by overwhelming evidence, to solve any problem, whether it was a bizarre cult murder or a controversial presidency. He believed there was a truth with a capital T, and he could prove it to you beyond a reasonable doubt.
He passed away in 2015, which our source notes in the context of the book's sales figures being updated at the time of his death.
He really left behind this legacy of rigorous, aggressive, argumentative nonfiction. He definitely did not write to make friends. He wrote to win the argument.
Before we start to wrap up, I want to bring up one last very strange item from the external links section of our source material. It's baffling.
It's the Kim Jong-il connection, isn't it?
It is a news article titled Charles Manson's Letter to End Korean Leader Kim Jong-il.
It's a detail that really underscores the persistent, unwavering madness of the man. Years and years later, from a prison cell in California, Charles Manson was writing letters to the dictator of North Korea.
But why? What could he possibly have to say?
From what I can gather, it seems Manson saw himself as a political prisoner, a revolutionary, and a world leader in exile. He saw Kim Jong-il, another international pariah, as a peer, as someone who would understand him. It's this final, absurd, pathetic footnote that shows Manson's grand delusion never wavered. He still thought he was a major player on the world stage, even while he was rotting away in a cell.
Fascinating and deeply disturbing. Okay, so to try and bring all this together, Helter Skelter is so much more than just a true crime book. It's a 7 million copy bestseller that serves as a kind of autopsy report for the 1960s.
It's the definitive procedural account of how a legal team methodically dismantled a cult and its messiah.
It took a Beatles song and forever transformed it into a symbol of ultimate terror.
And at the end of the day, it established the template, the DNA, for almost every true crime podcast, documentary, and book that has followed in its wake.
I want to leave our listener with one final provocative thought. We've talked about this long list of media, films, and shows from 1971 all the way up to a new project scheduled for 2025. We are coming up on 60 years since these crimes were committed. Why are we, as a society, still retelling this one specific story over and over again?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it might be because this story represents the ultimate loss of innocence narrative for modern America. It's the moment the door was locked for good, the moment you stopped picking up the hitchhiker on the side of the road. We keep going back to it, I think, because we're still trying to understand how the beautiful, hopeful dream of the 60s turned into such a specific, ugly, and violent nightmare. And for better or worse, Vincent Bugliosi's book is the only real map we have of that descent.
The map of the descent. That is a chilling and perfect place to end it. Thank you for helping me unpack this monster of a book.
My pleasure. It was a fascinating deep dive.
And thank you, as always, to our listeners. If you want to explore any of the sources or adaptations we talked about today, check out the show notes. We will see you on the next deep dive.